Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Parsons. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a senior site reliability engineer at Amperity. Today, I'm going to talk about driving observability adoption forward as an internal champion of observability at Amperity. I'd like to share our experience about why we evaluated new observability tooling and talk about what I think helped us and set us up for success when we did most of our evaluation during the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I get into the areas of focus that I felt were important during our evaluation, I want to give a bit of background about why we wanted to evaluate observability tooling to begin with. At Amperity, we employ a distributed on-call model where each engineering team has their own on-call rotation, and they have ownership of their services and code in production. Within that model, I recognized that we were asking our on-call engineers to become proficient and knowledgeable about a lot of different tools, patterns, and interfaces to be able to do their job. Dashboards of metrics, third-party systems with live log output, and tools for querying unstructured logs, among other tools. You know, 2 of the 3 pillars of observability. We started to introduce and teach observability-centric concepts to help bolster the experience of emergent issue investigation and curious exploration. So we needed something to help capture rich context in structured events, in arbitrarily wide event maps. We didn't feel quite ready to adopt OTel or open telemetry patterns. So to facilitate that process of collecting rich and wide context from instrumentation, we rolled our own observability-centric integration library. And for this to work for our evaluation, it was important to ensure that the patterns to collect and observe code would be simple and would be as natural and understandable as inserting a log output line in code. It had to be responsible for tracking trace and span ID relationships on behalf of the user. And adding or merging in new context into event maps had to be simple. And with this first version of our library ready to use, it was then important to define how we wanted to improve engineering outcomes. When I constructed our plan for how we were going to evaluate our tooling, regardless of the combination of tools we may have settled on, we had to focus the evaluation on observability's effect on a few key areas of engineering experience. Are we further empowering engineers with service ownership in production to see and understand how their services behave in live environments? Are we improving our collective confidence about what we deploy to production? Are we improving our mean time to detection and mean time to recovery, particularly around ugly and nefarious types of issues that can come up within a distributed services model? I constructed a few use cases tailored to our situation that sought to measure the impact of our tools on those outcomes. I needed to focus on tangible engineering experiences in order to do a proper comparative analysis. It was important for me to hold open as a possibility that status quo was a valid outcome. Maybe the tools I selected to evaluate don't improve the outcomes at all. It was important to be open and receptive to status quo as an outcome and still learn from the evaluation experience. The use cases also let me do both qualitative and quantitative analyses, not just, am I reducing mean time to detection and mean time to recovery on the quantitative side, but also questions like, when you're investigating an issue you get paged on, is this tool frustrating to use? Do you feel like using this tool helps you better understand your service? And so on. Around the time we began the evaluation process, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic fundamentally changed how we came to do work. Looking back at our observability tooling evaluation in retrospect, there were 4 areas of focus that I anchored to that I think ultimately helped us and set us up for a successful evaluation. And those 4 areas were learn, engage, instrument, and measure. For learn, it was important for me to maintain an attitude of learning and growing. There's a lot of wisdom and experience in this field, And it was important for me to give proper credit to those who have been sharing these ideas for a long time, and to continue to grow and expand my own knowledge in this field of observability. For Engage, it was vitally important for me to not only find engineers across all of our adjacent engineering teams to be key stakeholders for this process, but also to do the work and keep them engaged and involved in the process. Because we were all working remotely, I couldn't depend on hallway conversations or in-person whiteboard and brainstorming sessions or any of that. And given our remote work arrangement, I had to stay on top of keeping the key stakeholders involved in the process. Otherwise, I risked carrying the bulk of this evaluation on my own, which I don't think would have led to a successful outcome. After we connected the integration library across our product code, I helped coordinate product training sessions to make sure they understood how to use each of the potential new tools. I worked with key stakeholders and shared observations I was making within their event telemetry inside the tools. I made myself available to answer their questions and to walk them through any observability concepts they were curious about. For Instrument, you recall I said that one of the goals of our observability library was to provide simple patterns to follow. This was the time to ask the key stakeholders about their experience using those patterns. It was also important to find opportunities for instrumentation on challenging problems. I tried to pay close attention to tickets and pages that would get opened that the key stakeholder would be asked to solve for. If I thought applying instrumentation patterns to those problems could improve future occurrences of it, I would talk to the key stakeholder about exploring those possibilities. For Measure, in order for me to make the justification for the recommendations we were making, I had to collect informal feedback and conduct surveys. I sought out anecdotal examples of key stakeholders using the tools on their own and what they had to say about it. And we ended up getting wonderful feedback from our key stakeholders. And I think it helped me when it came time to share my findings with the decision makers at Amperity. These areas of focus are applicable whether there's a pandemic or not. But I think that the impact of the pandemic elevated the emphasis I needed to have in these areas in order to succeed. As a result of our evaluation process, we did choose to bring on a new tool. And I think the evaluation process and focus on these areas helped us make a well-reasoned decision that benefited us all. And it moved us in a direction of better and happier engineering outcomes, despite the remote only work circumstances. And that brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you all very much for your attention today. And I'll be more than happy to share more detail about our experience and to take your questions.
Josh, thank you very much for giving that talk. A common observation has been that COVID-19 has done more to advance your company's digital transformation than your last 5 CIOs combined. And if we take a look across the landscape, that is directionally correct. My question for you is, how much of these initiatives, and I don't want to use the word learning, so let's pretend I didn't, would have been possible without having the forcing function of surprise, we're all suddenly very remote and had no time to prep for it?
I think that, as I said in the last slide, that the engagement part was so important regardless of, all 4 of those points were important. They would have been important, but I think Engage in particular and doing the legwork to keep people involved in the process, adjacent engineers involved in the process was so important that I can't shoulder that burden by myself. And I think that whether you're face-to-face, have those hallway conversations, or able to engage or not, I think I think I still would have emphasized that engagement process and really building the case by getting a coalition of people who understand what we're trying to drive towards in terms of the outcomes to seek those outcomes that we were driving for.
Ben winds up asking, what was the time frame for this experiment? In other words, many of these kinds of changes take time to really sink in. Were you able to measure change in the time frame that you had available? And again, if not, please don't make us go back on lockdown so you have more time to wind up evaluating the results of this.
Sure. I think prior to it's important for contextual information that before the evaluation of the tooling process that we as an engineering team had dedicated a month towards increasing dev velocity, like really focusing on those aspects of, observability was one of those pieces that we sort of highlighted as like one place where we can increase dev velocity. That was in October of 2019 when I, kind of took that. But I took that time to like write out rationale documents and sort of make the case for here's how we want to do observability at Amperity. Write them down, talk about the goals and the outcomes that you want to have, and share them. I had to share them with adjacent engineering teams. That took a few months, like 2 or 3 months probably. And part of that process of like kind of giving yourself momentum to sort of spread the word of observability and like what it's meant to do in terms of getting to those outcomes. Yeah, I mean, you need a few months to like kind of propagate the idea and get people on board, sort of like mentally speaking. But then when the evaluation process started, I would say I guess we started that it was right after the pandemic started it was like April or May when we like actually started our tooling evaluation. By then I had already selected my key stakeholders and sort of, had like direct channels of communication, and we finished the evaluation in August. So that was like 3 or 4 months of like tooling evaluation in terms of
pandemic's over, time to call it. Yeah,
right.
I wish.
But the scope, to your previous point about the scope, yeah, we definitely, because we didn't have a lot of time for evaluation, we had to be very selective about the kinds of areas that we wanted to like be tooling against.
This one got a whole bunch of feedback question. Can you share some insight on how you get teams to even try a new tool in a mature environment? Because trying to get a decent sized org to try a potentially overlapping vendor is daunting, and oh my stars, yes.
Yes, it is. I can definitely commiserate with that. That is a very daunting thing to have to undertake. I said in the talk that status quo is sort of a possibility whenever you undertake like the possibility of adding tools. And I felt like, at least for me in this process, I had to remove some of my ego out of the process, which is to say like, yeah, I have like my preferred tool, but it might not work for everyone else. And you have to kind of first keep that in mind in terms of just being open to the possibility that like the way that you see things is not necessarily how everyone else sees it. So first that, but then, when you build on top of that, I guess it's sort of, again, you have to be able to do the analysis of the tool that you're selecting and how they relate to the outcomes that you're trying to get to, right? Do the tool, like the tool that you're thinking about, does it actually help you achieve the goals that you're trying to get to? The engineering outcomes, the happiness, I don't want people to get paged in the middle of the night. I want people, on the front line when they are investigating emergent issues to I want them to be able to get to the underlying, the contributing factors to incidents and so on. And you have to do that kind of, certainly there's a cost analysis that kind of goes into that, but like for whatever tool you're selecting, getting people on board, you just have to communicate. You always have to just keep hammering home the point of that the tool should always be directed towards your goals and outcomes.
I guess a related question beyond that is, and it comes from Ethan Cohen, do you have experience implementing observability in services owned by teams who know little to nothing about those services? Gee, I don't know. I've never seen a team like that. How do you make progress?
That's a good question. I would say like for I guess like if you have engineers who have switched teams or people who have been recently onboarded and sort of join a team where they own services, I think that I guess I would kind of direct it towards like mentorship and being available to answer questions, and just again that engagement level of sort of understanding where people are in the process of like understanding the system that they're owning in production, that it's important to meet people where they are and like but engage with them and be, you know, try to be as helpful as possible about talk them through examples of problems that are particularly challenging for them to solve. Like if they come to you in terms of like mentorship or questions, or just, or if they talk in Slack and channels like, I'm having a huge problem with this, and like just be willing to engage and meet people where they are in that process. I think that that's sort of universal, but maybe would be useful for junior, more junior, or people who are new to services.
I'm assuming that you're not planning on a second pandemic, so you can wind up running the experiment again.
Nope.
That seems to. Well, no one's planning for it, but you know.
No, I think I've had quite my fill of pandemic, but you know, there's still like, you know, even retrospectively, like with this pandemic, there's still a lot. There's still a lot we can retrospectively look back and learn and process that's still yet to be processed. And yeah, of course, we don't want another pandemic, of course, but you know, I think again that learn bullet point that I made at the end, just always have an attitude of like looking back and having an attitude of just growing your knowledge. And actually the previous talk about the shoulders of giants, like I see as far as I do because I stand on the shoulders of giants. There's a lot of great wisdom out there for people who've been doing this a lot longer than I have. And so I think as long as you adopt that mentality, I think it will serve you well.
3 questions just came in. We'll get to them quickly. Do you have a take on Guerrilla instrumentation, where your team infiltrates the rest of the company and adds instrumentation only to let the org realize after the fact just how useful it is? You know, like elves in the night.
Yeah.
My apologies. That's an appropriate term towards the elvish.
I guess like I don't want to like bail out on that answer by saying like it depends, but I think that again, if you keep the goals and outcomes in sight when you're thinking about quote unquote guerrilla instrumentation, that like what purpose is it serving ultimately? Like, are you trying to make a statement, make a point about something? Like, look, I know I have a vision for like where this needs to go, and I'm going to just do it and show you how it's done. I mean, yes, that could be effective, I suppose. I guess like my stance is that I would rather do coalition building rather than trying to just kind of go in my own way and like, no, I know how to do this. This is how we're going to do it here. Like, I think it's better.
Right, because I'm with you on that. Because otherwise, it feels like it's a move, fool. I'll do your job for you, and that doesn't that doesn't win friends or influence people in any positive way.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna. I think the best way for at least for my success, like the way that I was able to convince upper management to bring on a new tool, was through the coalition building that I did and the engagement that I did.
Yeah, which is the next question. How do you get buy-in from organization and engineers to adopt new tools and the observability mindset? It feels like on some level you could, at least in the early days, part of the reason that COVID-19 was so successful is everything's changing now in a lot of ways. We're not sure how or why, but quick, while you're panicking, go ahead and run this 3-liner, please. It feels like you can sneak it in early on, but there has to be a coalition building and a buy-in story later.
Yeah, it's you can think of it like it is a snowball effect of sorts, but like you just have to think of it organizationally in layers, right? Like talk with your team, talk with your manager, have the manager talk with adjacent engineering teams as managers about the process, and like keep it front and center, especially when we're doing like post-incident review, like the keynote at the top of the conference about post-incident review, and just keep like, if you are a person who is passionate about observability and the outcomes that it drives towards, that you know, you're gonna find opportunities to talk about ways, the principles of observability and applying them to everyday work situations and finding ways to drive those conversations. But you have to think about it organizationally and like kind of build it from the bottom up, I think, to get that buy-in.
So I guess it's interesting to me how many of these questions are all coming back to the same exact thing, which is it's not about tools, it's about the culture and how you drive change. It turns out the hard problems in observability are not YAML sucks. Who knew? It becomes a hard problem. I guess the last one, and this is a bit more of a, I guess, buzzwordy one, so feel free to pass on it. I would. But how do you move an org away from the theater of 3 pillars of observability to more modern observability concepts? That feels slippery and hard to grab onto. And you don't move away from 3 pillars of observability if your entire marketing campaign for a vendor trying to sell you something is built around them, but all right.
I mean, yeah, you'll notice that the only time I really mentioned the pillars was sort of like sarcastically, right? But because I understand the buzzwordiness of stuff like that. But nonetheless, I think that leaning on white papers, blog posts from people in the industry who know what they're talking about and actually sharing the wisdom from within that, you know, like that sort of doesn't need to use those terms like, yes, all the logs, all the traces, all the metrics. Like, if you know, if you have read or watched talks from people who know what they're talking about, and
well, I've certainly never given one like that, but go on.
But I would say that like there's a stark difference between the writings of people who are practicing observability that don't need to depend on the 3 pillars. And I would say like the literature on that doesn't need to depend on it. You can still sort of talk about, I think you can still talk about observability without necessarily having to resort to the 3 pillars. If it distills it down into like a way that, into like an easily understandable way for people, that's one thing. I get that to some degree, but sorry, I lost my train of thought a bit. But I'd say depend on, I think the literature, blogs, talks, you can get a lot out of that and share that information to get the same point across.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to take us through your experience and deliver a great talk. Really
Thank you so much.
Thank you.